It's not just A-levels that have come out today. There are loads of options for students to take. The T-level we've just found out about. So let's chat to David Hughes, who's Chief Exec of Association of Colleges. Good afternoon, David. Welcome to the show. Always a nerve-wracking day, isn't it, for those receiving the results?
Oh, it certainly is, isn't it? And your clips earlier showed that, didn't they? You know, like any normal year. And this year we've got lots of young people who are delighted. They've met their expectation. They've got their place at uni. They're going to move forward. It's fantastic. We've also got some who just missed out and they're worried. That happens in any normal year. You know, what we're about, though, is saying, don't panic. You know, there are options. You know, you can go back into clearing. You can look at other options around university. You can go into work, you know, as we've just been discussing. There are lots of employers out there. You can go into an apprenticeship, you know, and there are options out there. And it is a bumpy road. There are very few people who just smoothly progress through life without a few bumps in the road. You might have had a bump.
That's the key point, isn't it? And it's very easy for people of our vintage to say, don't panic, but so much pressure is on people. You apply it yourself, but other people apply it on you too. But the real message is don't panic, because like you mentioned, there are different courses students can take. So what are the differences? You know, what are the different things students can do beyond what people would think is the conventional route after school?
Well, we've just been talking about T-levels. I mean, it was a very small number this year. It was literally the first ever students to get their T-level results. It was something like, you know, 1,000, just over 1,000. There'll be more already on T-levels now who will finish next year, and they grow in number over the years. You know, so T-levels are really important. BTECs people talk about a lot. And that's a sort of a particular qualification, but there are others a bit like BTECs, you know, the Cambridge Nationals and so on. So the more vocational, they might be in, you know, childcare, they might be in construction, they might be in sport, you know, might be in performing arts. And there'll be lots of youngsters today getting their results on those qualifications. And many of those go on to higher education. Some of them go straight into work. Some of them will be doing an apprenticeship at a higher level, you know, so moving from maybe a construction T-level into a site supervisor apprenticeship, you know, which is another level up, you know, really important. So people need to look at all of those options. And we want to celebrate all of those achievements. You know, A-levels are great. Progression to university is great. But what about the T-level student who's just got a job in a propeller manufacturer? You know, that's fantastic as well.
Yeah, David, you are the Chief Exec of the Association of Colleges, right? So, you know, you have a perfect position to tell us how that trend has changed. Do you think more people are going for the alternative option or following a trade or doing things differently than perhaps they were 10 years ago?
Look, I think it's changing. You know, I think there's some surveys recently of parents and young people who are really getting more interested in work-focused apprenticeships and technical education, but partly because they're worried about taking on a debt over 3 years of university, because you come out of university potentially with £50,000 of debt. It's not normal debt. You don't pay it back unless you earn. But it still worries a lot of people. And there's a real benefit with some big names, you know, organisations like the NHS, organisations like KPMG in the finance world, who are offering brilliant apprenticeships for 18-year-olds where they're being paid from day one and they're getting their higher education, you know, part-time while they're working. That looks really attractive because you don't come out after 3 years with a debt. You come out having been paid for 3 years with no debt and a qualification and probably a career that is really starting to blossom. So we're seeing more people interested in that. What we need is more employers to offer those sorts of opportunities to young people, because there are some brilliant opportunities, but there just aren't enough out there.
It's a conversation we're having a lot around the dinner table at the moment. I've got a 12-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter, and we always ask, what do you think you'll do when you grow up? And we do find that our conversation tends to steer them towards more vocational careers. You know, it's like, do you ever think about being a plumber, Jimmy? You know, that'd be a great gig. And, you know, what's the conversation like for you around the dinner table? You know, what advice do you give when you've not got your professional hat on when you're asked for it?
Yeah, well, look, I think the advice that I gave my 3 kids who are in their 20s now, they all went to university, was do what feels right for you. You know, look at all of the options. And luckily I had the knowledge to make sure they looked at all of the options. And for them, university was a really good route. It suited the way they wanted to learn. It suited what they were about. And they've done well from that, you know. Yeah. But there are others for whom university isn't the right route. You know, it's a really fantastic education for some. Yeah. So there are lots of 16, 17-year-olds who just want to get out of education for a while. They want to get into work. They're desperate to kind of earn some money, a bit of independence, you know. So they can do some learning later. They can learn in an apprenticeship on the job, you know. So I think it's it's all about making sure all the options are looked at. Young people are given the advice to go with what feels right to them. But I think there's a lot of pressure on them to go to university if they can. If they're doing well, the schools often say, go to university, it's the best option. And I don't think that's the best advice in every case.
What if your kids had come to you and said, you know what, actually, university, despite being academics, not for us, Dad, we actually fancy going to work in Ibiza for the summer and then disappear. How would you have responded to that? You know, what kind of advice would you give to your children or other people's children if they're having those conversations right now about the future?
Well, it's a hypothetical. I'm not sure what I would have said to my kids. I'll have to think about that one. But I think the advice is life's a long time. Careers are going to be 50 years long for children of that generation. You know, starting a year later because you're spending a year in Ibiza, maybe that's okay. You're going to learn a lot in that time. You know, and going to university is partly about leaving home, being independent, learning about living with other people. Well, you probably do that in Ibiza, you know, with bells on, I suspect.
Yeah.
So it might be a good experience. I'm not advising it, by the
way. David, looking back at your 19-year-old self, would you have done things differently? Things have obviously worked out very well for you. Happy family man, great career. But do you look back in those decisions you made in the heat of the moment, perhaps, and think, maybe I'd have done things differently?
Well, I nearly left school at 16. I went and got a job, and it was only when the guy interviewing me told me to go on to do A-levels and not take the job because he thought I'd do better, that it really hit home. And I think you just can't underestimate the importance of asking for advice and talking to people and trying to get that range of opinion. You know, the school teachers have got some advice, the careers people, your parents, but I think what I really regret is not having been out into the world of work more. You know, I had part-time jobs, but there was no career support for me to see other sectors of the economy, to try out things, you know. So I'm really keen that we give young people from a really early age access to different professions, different jobs, different sectors of the economy, so they can find out for themselves, you know, because who knows whether you want to, I mean, how do people know they want to be a radio presenter? Well, it's easy because they listen to the radio. But how do they know if they want to be a radiographer? Well, they don't, because they never see one, you know. So how do you give people that range of understanding of what the options are? And I think that's the really key point. But yeah, I'm not sure I regret anything about my life, but that's another story.
That's a chat for another day between you and I, David. But thanks so much for coming on. Top line message though, don't panic, right?
Yeah, take advice, go out and look at all the options. Talk to as many people as you can and keep calm, really keep calm. It's not the disaster it might feel like at the moment.